Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this edition of the Big East Rewind. My name is Chuck Everson, and my co-host, as always, from Syracuse University, Sonny Spera. How are you, Sonny?
Chuck, doing great, man. The weather's turning. It's looking great. And we got phenomenal guests. What better to talk? Real sports, man. Show. Real sport.
During this time we've been doing the show, we've had a lot of former players on, as you know. Mm-hmm. And inevitably, everybody talks about how they were recruited and how they got to the school that they went to, whether it be Georgetown, St. John's, Syracuse, Villanova, it doesn't matter. They all got recruited pretty much the same way. And inevitably, they all mention five-star basketball camp. So what better way, we just had the Hall of Fame inductions the other day. What better way to honor Howard Garfinkel than to talk about his beloved five-star basketball camp and the impact that it had on college basketball and basketball in general, not just college basketball. There was a lot of great coaches there and stuff. And we have two of them with us today, Sonny. We
Absolutely.
have both of them who coached for Coach Massimino. Both of them were assistants at Coach Massimino's place and in Villanova. The first guy coached at Xavier and in Providence and Virginia. He's a member of the New York City Basketball Hall of Fame. Pete Gillen, Coach Pete Gillen is with us. How are you, Pete?
Good, Chuck. Sonny, great to be with you guys.
Thanks for coming down.
Thank you very much for having me.
And the other guy,
good to see you, Coach.
The other guy is somebody near and dear to me, Sonny, near and dear, close to my heart. He's the guy. If you have somebody to blame, he's the guy that's responsible for getting me to Villanova. So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but he was also he was on the '85 team with us, and he was also the head coach at Fairfield and at Siena. He did a great job at both of those. He's been an assistant coach all over the place. Really, really good guy. My buddy, Coach Mitch Buonaguro. Mitch, how are you, pal?
I'm good, Chuck. Thanks for having me, Sonny. It's a pleasure. And for me, to talk about five stars is a labor of love. I loved Howie, and I loved the camp. So this is great for me to be able to just talk about the camp.
Mitch, you realize, okay, we had Coach Boeheim on.
Yeah. Right.
And he was a little upset with me that I couldn't land Everson when he came to town. Okay. now that I met you a little bit more formally, I can push that on you. I can push it. Wasn't my fault.
Sonny was my host and Jensen's host. He couldn't get either of us, Mitch.
Wasn't my. I have a honorary 85 ring, by the
way. Yeah. We made him an honorary Wildcat at one of the Final Fours that Jay had won 16 and 18, So guys, talk about your time as assistants and what it was like, on the recruiting trail. What that part of your job had to be an arduous task sometimes. I mean, you're constantly calling kids. There was no social media. There was no cell phone. So you had to call the house. I remember getting phone call after phone call from people. Talk about what that was like and how you got to kids and what kind of tools you used to find out who was a player and who was not maybe good enough to play at your university.
Mitch, why don't you start it, Mitch?
Well, back when I started in the late 70s, there were not a lot of rules. You could go out the whole year. So it was a lot easier to get relationships formed. You could get to know the high school coach, get to know the parents, get to know the kid. I remember, just take an example, Chuck, John Bonone, who I recruited, and obviously turned out to be a great player at Villanova. I went to see him at least 30 times. Unfortunately, I had to take Rolly a few times, and I almost died driving home. It was about 4 a.m. Rolly snoring in the back, but we had a lot of fun recruiting John. But to make a point, things have changed now. You couldn't do that now. I think years ago, and Pete probably knows this. When we were in the 70s and 80s, the summer camp scene wasn't as sophisticated. There was basically five-star. You would go there. I mean, all the coaches would go there. All the good players were there. And I was fortunate enough to be able to work there, and so was Pete. So I'm not saying it gave us an advantage, but it did give us a chance to evaluate the kids a little better, get to know them. We taught them at stations, we coached them in games. So the whole landscape back in the 70s and 80s was different. You know, you really could get to know a kid. I think the reason now there's so many mistakes and kids leaving so much is there's not a lot of time to see these kids. I think coaches don't get to know them and don't really know their character and what they can bring to a program. So we were fortunate in those days to be able to really, I think, get out, see kids, spend time at summer league, spend time at 5-star. And I think it helped us make better decisions.
Yeah.
Same question to you, Pete.
Yeah, Chuck, I was assistant at 4 schools. First, University of Hawaii. I was there. And
you were there with Rick Pitino, correct?
Yep. Reckless Rick Pitino was there 2 years. I was there 1. And some stories we can talk about, some we can't. But Rick was great. And then we were there 1 year. And then there was some problems. So they threw me in the Pacific. And I'm doing a backstroke with piranha fish biting at my rear end. I wound up at VMI. I wound up Virginia Military. So you go from Hawaii to VMI. I mean, that's like culture shock. So at Hawaii, we used to have a shoot around like everybody. And some guy named Packy Ryan, who was from Michigan, he used to go surfing in the morning. So he came to the shoot around, shooting around in flip-flops, sands all over the court. I said, what the heck's the matter with the court? Oh, yeah, Packy just came from surfing. So we had some issues there, but it was a lot different. Everybody wanted to visit Hawaii because it's beautiful, but it was tough to get to land the guys, you know what I mean? Because so far from their family, their girlfriends, their parents, et cetera, their high school coaches, you know, the guys that came to Hawaii sometimes maybe didn't have as good a situation. They were coming away from something or kind of getting away from some situation they didn't like, whatever. But we got everybody to visit, Mitch, but it's tough to land them. Then VMI, I had to sell, you know, shoes. I say, hey, you get free shoes, you get free haircuts. I said, you get nice white uniforms. So it was a different world, but I drove like 55,000 miles in a little Pinto from Washington to New York City. We got John Good, you know, a guy who was ought to be a real good player from St. Nicholas of Talentine, which was a power many years ago.
Powerhouse.
And, you know, after then he gets there for a week and he's in a rat line. He's got a guy about 5'1" screaming at him. You know the right Bible. Do you know this? So he wanted to kill me, John Good. So, but as Mitch said, we got to know a lot of the kids, and you know, you sell yourself as well as you sell, you know, the school. You know what I mean? You try to, and the head coach, of course, and came to Villanova after that. And Mitch taught me a lot. Mitch was already there as an assistant and worked with Rowley. First thing Mitch said to me is, Pete, you know, buy a helmet. I said, what? Buy a helmet because it's going to be tough here. You know, with Rowley's, you know, Lord of Mercy was a demanding coach. I mean, we used to walk in the snow, Mitch, right? Remember, walk in the snow from our apartment somewhere outside of Villanova. We'll walk about a mile to school. But you know, it was different. Getting to know the kids was a lot better. I think you knew them a lot better. You weren't limited, you know, and it wasn't so early. Now they're recruiting kids, right? 9th, 10th grade. Before, most of those guys were juniors and seniors. So I liked it. You know, it was, as Mitch said, not a lot of rules. You got to know the players. And I went to Notre Dame with Digger, the chairman of the board. So him and Rowley, you know, big difference, you know. So I said, Digger, and I love Digger. He gave me a great job at a great school. I said, Digger, can we get a highlight film to bring in the phones? Digger says, I am the highlight film. Don't worry about it. I got it. But I worked at 4 schools. But Mitch said you get to know the players more, all different. We used to do a lot of handwritten letters at the time. You know, you weren't texting and an email. I handwritten notes. You know, maybe tell me about a Marco wrote a note to Jeff Rowland every day. You know, a little. So you know, the communication was different with the handwritten notes. And I think you could call them as much as you wanted at the time. And then they broke rules. You had to, you know, once a week or whatever. But you got to know them a lot better. And I liked it that way.
Let me ask you a question about specifically with the camp situation. How did you guys get involved with being at the camp? I mean, how did that evolve? Was that from you? Were you invited?
Mitch,
you know, how did that come about?
Well, Sonny, with me, I was a pretty good player in Brooklyn. I went to Bishop Loughlin. I was I had a really good junior year. I played in a really good team there. Howard saw me play. Howard at that time was just starting to get involved with the High School Basketball Illustrated, his report in the late 60s. So he was starting to go around and looking at players, especially in the city, because he lived in Manhattan. So he came to see me play at St. John's Prep in Brooklyn. You know, he was a funny, you know, when he walked in, he looked like he was getting ready to go to the Carnegie Deli. You know, he had the slick back hair, he had the overcoat on, the trench coat. You know, he was an interesting looking person, Garth. And he comes up to me and my coach Brian Heaney and says, "Look, we have a summer camp called 5 Star. It's in the Poconos. Would you like to come?" So I went as a camper for 2 sessions.
Okay.
In 1970. I then later got a scholarship, really out of the camp. The camp Chuck Daly recruited me out of the camp, and I went to BC. And then I went back. What a lot of the 5 Star people did, Sonny, is they went as a camper or a counselor, and then I went back. So I was a camper in 72. I went back as a counselor. You know, he invited me back to work the camp as a counselor. So I would do reffing and you know, maybe do a little coaching, but I wasn't doing the actual stations and the coaching the older kids. So I came back as a counselor, and then when I graduated from BC, I went as I was a grad assistant at BC and went as a coach. He gave me coaching responsibilities. So it was camper, counselor, coach, and then I got to Villanova through Mike Fratello, who was working the camp. He recommended me to Rollie. So I started at Villanova in 77, and then there was no restrictions. The college coaches could work the camp. Later on, they kicked us out in 1990, but that's how I got in, Sonny. I mean, I got in, you know, through going there, working there, and then getting to Villanova, and then, you know, I still worked the camp until 1990, until they kicked us out.
How about you, Pete? How'd you get involved?
Good question, Sonny. I was a high school coach after I get out of college, Fairfield University. I coached grade school for 1 year. Then I coached at Brooklyn Prep High School in Flatbush in Brooklyn for a year, freshman. And then the head coach retired, Mike Lawn, and I became the head varsity coach. And we played in a tournament, the Monsignor King basketball tournament in Brooklyn that Mitch might be familiar with. And we were fortunate we won the tournament. It was 8 good teams, public league teams, Catholic League, Staten Island, whatever, Long Island. We won that tournament, 8 teams. So Goff came up to me after we won the tournament. "Hey, would you like to come to the camp?" And as Mitch said, he came in, he scared me a little bit. He's hitching, twitching, got a cigarette falling out of his mouth. You know, he's got the moose hair. You know, I didn't know if he was going to, you know, he was going to be a hitman or something. I said, so I thought about it. I said, "Let me call you back." So I ran to the weeds. I said, "Thank you very much." Mr. Garvin called me the next day, but I got to go wax my Jeep. Now, I don't have a Jeep, but I told him I was going to wax it. So then we played it next year again, Monsignor King, and we won it again. And he asked me again, and I did a little research. I said, "Yeah, I'd love to come." So I went that year, and you know, I went for a couple of years. And one quick story, we have some from 5 Star. I got my bell rung. My first few years were like 1-7, lucky to win a game. I mean, because there's all sorts of guys that are wheeling, dealing. One guy, Lord of Mercy, Frank Marino, was there, and he was a character. He was like a JV high school coach. And every year he won the draft. You have a draft, and you know, you have boards and top 12 guys, point guards, 2 guards, small forward centers. So he won the draft like 4 years in a row. I said, "Goff, I got like one of the worst picks every year. This guy, Frank, how does he get the one pick every year?" Goff says, "Hey, you schmuck." He says he palms the one. He makes the draft. He puts the one in his palm, puts it in his pocket. Everybody else pulls out of a hat. Then he puts the one back in the hat, pulls it out, one. So he got the one 4 years in a row because he palmed it. He put it in. So we were in with, you know, it was den of den. It was unbelievable. So that's how I got there, Sonny. And that was the best thing I ever did, go there. And I learned so much basketball there. I over 25 years I was at the camp. I don't know how many exactly, but tons of years as a high school coach, college assistant, came back as a college head coach when you could do it for a couple of years, you know, just in administration. And then when I got out of coaching, I came back again. So, but he invited me after watching me coach a high school team, Brooklyn Prep.
And joining us now, another assistant coach from Coach Massimino's stable of coaches at Villanova, 16-year NBA head coach. You know him from NBC and TNT, and he's about to do one last big game with his partner, Marv Albert, coming up tomorrow night. The czar of the telestrator, Coach Mike Fratello. Mike, thanks for coming on with us today.
Glad I can make it. It's been a hectic day trying to get to Atlanta and fitting this thing in all of a sudden with Marv Albert, but I'm looking forward to it, the opportunity to get back alongside him one last time before he finally hangs it up at the end of this season. It'll be a great night tomorrow night.
Coach, we were just talking about 5-star camp and how those relationships started, and how did you get involved with 5-star camp?
Unusual. I thought my career was over at 5-star before it ever started, because Hubie Brown had gotten in touch with me and said, would you like to work a basketball camp? It's called 5-Star Basketball Camp. Gave me the background on it. And this is way back in the beginning. And I said, great, I'd love to. He said, it'd be great exposure for you. And he said, you'll really learn a lot. I said, good. I said, what are the dates? And he gave me the dates. And it was the week that I was getting married and going to Mexico for our honeymoon. I called Hubie back. I said, Hubie, I can't do it that week. He said, what do you mean? I said, well, and you know what that's like, calling Hubie back to say something like that. So I said, I'm going to be out of the country. I'm in Mexico. I will have gotten married a couple of days before that. And he said, oh, okay. You know, the pause and everything from Hubie. And I said, I hope I get an opportunity. I'd love to do it next year. So I never knew if they were going to offer it to me again. But the following year, Hubie, along with Garf, made the offer to come back and work the camp. And that's how it all began.
Wow.
Great stuff. Now, when you started working there, did you start because Mitch said he started out as a player and then a counselor, and Pete's Avenue was as a coach. What was your pathway in?
I don't know if Mitch told you or not, but he also worked the concession stand, and I swear that he was putting money in his pocket. Okay.
He didn't say a word about that. He didn't say a word about that.
I was just one of the coaches, one of the many coaches that were there. I, did my stations and did the teaching, and tried to be a good follower and a good listener to what was going on there. And you had a head coach that ran the camp, and Hubie Brown was the head coach, and he had followed in Bobby Knight, I think, was the first head coach of 5-Star Basketball Camp. And that's kind of the guy who runs the whole camp and gives all the coaches their assignments and tells all the players where they're going. But remember, way back then, the numbers weren't as great as they grew to eventually down the road. And then you had multiple weeks and you had multiple sites. So all of that was part of the growing of 5-Star Basketball Camp. But, getting back in there with some of these gentlemen that we have with us right now, hearing Pete call out round right, his favorite offensive move.
Still hasn't worked yet, Mike. It still hasn't worked.
Are you still waiting, Coach?
That's why I'm on Boat Hill. We tried it at Providence, Xavier, and Virginia. It didn't work. That's why I'm toast.
I don't know. Rumor has that guys were paying money to try and keep Mitch off their team. They didn't want to have to draft him at all. Said, no, we have to put Mitch on somebody's team. So somebody wound up with Mitch.
Sonny.
Yeah.
Mike had a very famous position at 5-Star. His nickname was the Alligator, and he was in charge of the alligator pit. And Mike, you want to explain that? What your role was in terms of the pit, the alligator pit?
Well, Gar felt that there should be a little exercise in the morning before we got started. So when we would rally the troops and go around to the cabins and tell everybody in that wonderful, probably 37-degree, 42-degree weather at that time in the mornings when they were getting up out in the woods, we'd tell them to meet up on top. We had this flat area of land that, the grass would be soaking wet from having gone through the night. Now here it is the next morning. And these guys would come up and we would lead them through their exercises. Or if it was a cabin that was a very bad cabin at night where they wouldn't go to sleep and they would make all kinds of noise and disturb everybody else, we sent them to the alligator pit where they would have to do extra exercises to help their conditioning program. And that's how we started out the day, along with that outstanding breakfast that we would have in the cabin.
Now, they had it set up too, right, guys, that, if some of the guys that maybe couldn't afford to go to camp, they were waiters a lot of the guys that we've had on talked about being waiters there and the relationship that they had with Garf and with the other guys because of that. Talk about that a little bit, Mitch. Like how did that work? They had guys that came down and then they just put them to work at the camp and that paid their fee. Is that the deal?
Well, Chuck, when I went in 1970 as a camper, I told you that Garf approached me, the summer of going into my senior year, and he offered me what was called a camper worker. So what he told me was I think the camp at that time was $100. So he said, you could come, for $50. He gave me half off, but he said, you're going to have to bus tables and you're going to have to do things around the camp, maybe pick up the balls or whatever. So there were 25 or 30 of us that did that. He would pick out 25, 30 guys. And eventually, guys that were incredible players did that. I'm sure, like you could go through, just at the time I was there, there was, guys like Mel Davis, who's a great player at St. John's.
Sure.
You can go through the list. Moses Malone was there. Mike probably has a good story about Moses, and because Mike brought him to the camp. So, at that time, that's how he got the really good players to the camp. He made them or offered them camper workers, and I went 2 weeks for $100, and it was a great experience. I got to play against great players, and I got exposure. That's what Chuck Daly saw me play. So that's how I got to BC.
Hey, Mitch, I want to add to that, if I may, that think about how many guys have grown up now that were five-star campers, and they're telling their children nowadays when they're watching TV, 10, 15 years ago, see that guy over there, Alonzo Mourning? He waited at my table when I went to five-star camp. See that guy over there, Patrick Ewing? He waited on me. He took my table, my dishes back in the morning. They have all kinds of stories, I would imagine, from these legendary players that wound up being waiters and getting the scholarship program that Mitch got.
Yeah.
Mike, why don't you explain, Mike, how you got Moses there, Moses Malone? It was in 73, I think, that he came to August Honesdale. You were influential in that, getting him there.
Yeah, I had just joined Lou Campanelli at Madison College way back then. Now it's James Madison University, but I was Lou's assistant, and we were just starting out. It was an all-girls school, and they just made it co-ed. The new president came in from Memphis State at that time, became the president at Madison College. His name was Dean Ehlers was the AD, who was the AD at Memphis also, but Ron Carrier was the president. And Dr. Carrier said, I want to build a program here. I want to win games. I want to do it quickly, but I don't want to sacrifice anything of the academics. This is an outstanding academic school. I want to keep it that way. So one of the first things we did, try to put a recruiting program together. And I thought, with Lou, that if we sent out a letter to every high school coach in the state, explained who we were coming in, what we wanted to do at Madison College. We were giving out scholarships for the first time. And in Virginia at that time, you were not allowed to use state money for athletic scholarships. So our president raised the money from kind of like the booster people of the program and to get us scholarships. He asked Lou, how many do you need? Lou said 20 would be good. So we had, 20 scholarships to use over the 4-year period. And when these letters went out, I put a postcard in there. And I said, would you be kind enough to help list 5 names of outstanding underclassmen that you think will be good players? This one card comes back from Petersburg, Virginia, and the guy lists down there Moses Malone. He writes a little note. This guy is going to be the best player to come out of, you need to follow up on him. So I make a phone call to the head coach. He tells me all about him. I tell Garf about him. Garf says, all right, invite him to the camp. We invite him. The coach says, the only problem is he has no way of getting there. He had no money, this and that. So I said, Coach, how about this? Can you drive him to Madison College?
Yeah.
He said, yeah, I can get him over there. It'll be an hour and a half, 2-hour ride for it. I said, you get him over there and I'll drive him in my car up to 5-star camp. So that day we meet him. Moses comes with the coach. I said, hey, would you guys like to take a little ride around the campus? So we ride around the campus in a golf cart that we had painted purple and gold. And we're showing them the buildings and showed them the 5,000 seat new arena that we had just built, et cetera, et cetera. Well, after maybe an hour or so, it was time to leave, head to 5-star camp. So we're driving, and maybe we're an hour and a half, 2 hours into the drive, and my phone rings, and it's Dean Ehlers, the AD, and he said, Mr. Fratello, he said, let me ask you a question. Did you just have a young man on campus named Moses Malone? And I said, yes, sir. He said, do you know that you cannot do that? I said, gee, Mr. Ehlers, I am so sorry. He said, if that happens again, you will not be working here any longer. I said, I got your message, sir. And that was it. We went up to 5-star, and he had an incredible week. His team was undefeated. He was the best player in camp by far. I think Tom McCory wound up coaching him, if I remember. Yeah. And that was the connection with Moses Malone. Can you imagine Moses Malone commits to Madison College in Harrisonburg, Virginia?
Yeah. I remember, Mike, just to add on a little bit, I was there that week, and Tom McCory got the pick, as you said. He said, I'll take Moses Malone. I'm going to bed. So he went to bed right after taking Moses. You know what I mean? He didn't pick anybody else. Tom Kanchowski or somebody else picked the rest of his team. It didn't matter because they won every game, and Moses was unbelievable. I coached a one-on-one thing with him, and, he didn't talk a lot. You know what I mean? He just kind of shook his head, mumbled a little bit, but he was unbelievable. His team dominated 11-0, and Tom McCory was a star, but he didn't pick the rest of the team. I'll take Moses. Good night. I'm going to bed. Because a lot of time the draft went to 2 or 3 in the morning. Guys are arguing, for the 9th to 10th pick. Guys that have no necks and can't walk. They were arguing about that. So uniform. So, but he was unbelievable. He was super dominant.
Pete, he needed 2 other guys beside Moses. One was the guy to pass the ball inbounds, and the other was the guy to dribble it up over half court so you could get Moses down there, or they were going to have to give it to Moses to dribble it down.
Coach, statute of limitations are up. You're good. We talked to the NCAA. We're okay. We're good. Not going to be a problem.
So take us from when you guys were coaching, okay, and now you have the weeks for 5-star circled on your recruiting calendar. And what was some of how did you decipher who was who? I mean, I know some of the reports that came out. Tommy Kanchowski comes to mind, and we just lost Tom this year. Everybody, I think, who's played basketball in the Northeast knows who Tommy Kanchowski is. And talk about Tommy for a second and how important he was to the recruiting process, and how you used his reports or other reports that you might have gotten to go to 5-star, so you know who you're looking at when you get there.
Go ahead, Mike, if you want to talk about
it. I just remember, that I remember Gosh's report that he would put out. I remember the tryouts that we had where you had to go from court to court and try and evaluate these players and look down at your sheet and see who number 10 was. Did we even have numbers, Pete? Do you remember midway back?
No, there was never any numbers, Mike. No.
Right. I remember it made it so hard. Who's the kid over there with the Band-Aid on his left ear or whatever? And that's how you wrote your own little notes down that you would go into the draft that night and go around the room and picking your teams.
But Mitch, when you worked there while you were actually coaching. So how does that work? Like if you're working the camp and you're having fun with these kids, you're getting to know the kids, you're coaching them up a little bit, right? And then you're also at the same time recruiting the kid, and watching him play. You might not be able to have that conversation at camp. It might not be appropriate at that time to have that conversation. But how do you look at it and say, okay, I got notes on Sonny Spera. I want to look at this kid that might be going to Syracuse. We want to get him in our program. How does that all work when you're coaching the kid and trying to recruit him at the same time? Got to be tough.
With me, I mean, when I started working there in the late 70s, I was at Villanova, and Mike knows this. The camp started to get the really great players in the late 70s and early 80s. That's when the camp started to really, solidify its reputation as the best camp in the country. So on any given week, especially in Honesdale, you had all the top players there. And if you worked the camp, the big advantage that we had, and eventually this is what got us kicked out in 1990, Garth fought it hard. But we got kicked out because the other coaches were very jealous, and then when we won the title in 85, when we won the championship in 85, I think I told you this, Chuck.
Yeah.
Pinckney and the two McLeans were at 5-star the same week that I was there. And they made a pact that they were going to go to the same school. They didn't say Villanova, but they made a pact at the camp that they were going to go to the same school. And I think I told you when we played Georgetown in the 85 championship game, all 10 players went to 5-star. In fact, Villanova's top 7, that always was something Garth was really proud of. But eventually what you did, if you worked there, is you got to know them better. You worked with them. I would do a station. I got to know Eddie. I got to know Dwayne McClain, Gary McClain. So it was an advantage. I'd be the first to say it. But the thing that upset Garth in 1990 was it was only about 15 or 20 of us that was still working the camp in 90. It wasn't, and a lot of us got, this is where the thing really got, I think, a little tough for Garth. We started there not as college coaches. I just told you, Sonny, right, how I started.
Right.
I got there as a camper, I worked my way up. But eventually it became a real bone of contention with the NCAA. They thought we were, and it was an advantage. We got to know the kids. I just said that. But, Garth kind of had rules at the camp. He didn't want any of the coaches talking to the kids. He pretty much told us don't recruit them, but we got to know them. That was the key. We got to know them on a personal level, and that helped us in recruiting. But he had to change his whole camp in 1990. He had to get all new people to work. And he had great teachers there. So that really hurt him in 1990. He had to go back and get high school coaches.
It might have been better for you guys that he did that, because now you put business on the back and you can really get to know the coach from a player's point of view and get to know the player from a coaching point of view.
Yeah.
No.
So you know what kind of kid you're bringing in.
Yeah, it was a tremendous advantage, Chuck. I worked at the camp on many years like Mitch and Mike. I never recruit a guy that I coached on my team when I was coaching a team, but you find out who to recruit and who not to recruit. That was almost as important. Some guys were knuckleheads, you know what I mean? They were always late. They were lazy. You talk to the other coaches. So it was a tremendous advantage. You know what I mean? I just said, you talk to the coach at the camp. What type of guy is he? You watch him at the drills at the station. So it was a great advantage being an assistant there. When I was at VMI and Hawaii and Villanova and Notre Dame, it was a great advantage.
At that time, it was one of the only camps that was an actual teaching camp too, right, Mike? I mean, you guys, I've seen pictures of you lecturing. I've seen everybody from George Raveling to Mike Krzyzewski and everybody in between lecturing. It was more of a teaching camp than anything else, right?
It was one of the things that Garth really was proud of, and one of the things that he did not want to do away with. As more camps opened up, a lot of them got away from that, and basically it was a playing situation. You played games, and that was what the camp wound up being. Garth made sure he had the finest lecturers that he could get a hold of or heard about or knew about, and he wanted them to sit there in the stands, on the ground, wherever it might be, and listen to these great speakers talk about basketball and teach these youngsters. And then stations were paramount to him, that he did not want to drop stations, and he wanted them to rotating around so they experienced every coach, and each station had a different title to it, whether it was a rebounding station or a shooting station or a defensive station. And he was very, very proud of that. And well, he should be, because he had the outstanding instructors in the country working for him at the camp in that capacity. And they didn't just go through the motions. I mean, these people, the gentlemen that were coaching these stations, worked hard at these stations. And if you're doing it for 4 rotations, and what was a rotation, Pete? 20 minutes, maybe?
20 minutes, Mike. Yeah, 20 minutes.
Yeah.
It was brutal.
And with the sun and beating down on you, and you get done and you're trying to put everything into it. And Oh, by the way, that was just the first one. You have 3 more coming after
no
that
voice.
one. You were worn out when you got done at the end of the week doing your stations and then coaching your team, etc.
Yeah, but that was the heart of the camp, as Mike said, Chuck and Sonny. But it was tough. You put your guts on the floor. Everybody did, and great coaches: Brendan Malone, Rick Pitino, Ralph Willard, Buddy Garlow, who sadly passed away. Ronnie Rothstein, and go on and on. Mike Fratello, Mitch. I mean, every coach was a tremendous. Bob Hurley came up there. I mean, the best teachers in America. Tremendous teachers. With these kids. So the heart of the camp were the stations, but the coaches broke their tail, and golf walked around like a hawk, and watched everybody. And it would have been nice once in a while to go around and watch the coaches. You know what I mean? You learn a lot at the stations, as a coach there. But that was the heart of the camp. We had great games, but the stations and the teaching was tremendous.
Pete, I can remember the improvising of things. One summer, 1 week, whatever, I was at one end and I was teaching transition defense versus fast break. And at the other end was Dave Odom. And Dave Odom was teaching transition offense, off the break. So when we got done with the first X number of minutes, maybe the first 10 minutes of the station, I yelled down to him and I said, "Hey, Odom, you think you guys can score against us?" And he said, "Well, we'll sure try." So we didn't really plan it or talk about it, but we just kind of did it. He'd bang the ball off the backboard, they'd rebound outlet, and here they come. My guys would run out into, a tandem situation. Who's taking first pass, who's dropping opposite, and we'd play it out until you secured the rebound. And it wound up being a really good station, a very competitive station, to see if they could score buckets or we could get a stop at the other end.
Yeah, it was fun. It was a great station, Mike, you guys put together. It was tremendous.
The other thing that I would just add here is the camp was 8 days. It was camps now are 2-3 days.
Right.
We were there, Sonny and Chuck, for 8 days. We got there the day before to do the draft and the tryouts. Then you had the 6 days of really intense stations and games. And then you didn't get out of there. I mean, I remember the August week not getting home till after Labor Day. I mean, camps, I mean, it was 8 days of really, the coaches worked really hard. Like Mike said, you left the camp, you had bloodshot eyes, you couldn't breathe, it was a tough, it was a really difficult camp to work. And we had guys that were working the camp. I was working it on an average 4 weeks. I would do 2 in Honesdale, and then he would want me to go to Pittsburgh. The camp expanded in 1977 to Robert Morris. And there were many great players. That's where Jordan went, to Robert Morris in 1980. So the camp grew exponentially, from Honesdale. Remember, when Ubi, the first year in 1966, he had the camp outside Albany. Ubi saved the camp. Ubi Brown brought 25 kids. He was a high school coach. From 1966 to 1980, I remember Garth telling me they were doing 3,000 kids a summer, and they had 1,000 kids in the waiting list. So the camp grew incredibly, the popularity of it, the teaching, everything added to it. But in the 80s, I think that was the apex of it. You had really great play. Mullen, Ewing, just 1980 alone. Think of 1980, Ewing, Pinckney, Mullen, Jordan, Bias. They all went. Incredible camp. And I remember the Jordan days in Pittsburgh. He was incredible. He was unbelievable.
I got to ask you guys a question. Speaking of the lectures and the people that came in, who was the guy? Who was the one guy that he was the marquee lecturer? He was the one that everybody dropped what they were doing to go here.
I'll jump in there first. It's tough to find anybody, ahead of Hubie Brown.
Oh,
exactly. But other guys. Hubie was up there at the top of the mountain. But other guys that came in that really, just a couple. Like Jimmy Valvano came in and he did a hell of a job. And
he was great.
I remember Calvin Murphy coming in as a player, doing an incredible job. Just the energy that these guys put into it, and I'm sure you guys have so many other ones that just knocked your socks off when you listen to them.
Yep, there's great teachers tremendous. Coach K came in. Marv Kessler, a character from Queens, Lord of mercy on him, passed away, but he was a great teacher, a public high school coach in New York City. And Rick Pitino did a great job, and tremendous coaches up and down. It was unreal. Digger Phelps came in. One Digger Phelps story real quick. He came in and spoke, did a great job. He brought his daughter. So his daughter was out, and she's playing with a horse. Out, it was a big horse. The horse nipped her, bit her on the hip or the heels. So after the camp, all hell broke loose. Digger's daughter got bit. Everybody panicked. They took her down for emergency. Nothing bad. But just give her a tetanus shot. She didn't wind up with gangrene. But it was chaos there. But Digger did a great job. But hey, I'm coming to get if that damn horse is here. So his horse bit his daughter, but we got through it. But Digger spoke, and every coach, Dick Vitale was unbelievable. He spoke for like 2 hours, foaming and veining. I don't know what he said, but he was passionate, and he was great. But Mike did a great job. Mike spoke many times. Fratello, Mitch, so it was tremendous speakers. Everyone, golf. He went through a magnifying glass. The guy who spoke had to be good. To entertain 350 kids for 45 minutes or hour and 15 minutes, whatever.
I'm sure he had his pick of guys. I mean, everybody was probably fighting to get on that stage, right?
Yep.
Yeah. I would just interject with what Mike said. I always thought UB Brown was the greatest lecturer I heard, the years I was there. I thought he was incredible, the energy. Quick story, Goff is introducing him in August Honesdale. Goff, another thing with the camp, and Mike and Pete know this, with the introductions. They would last longer than the lecture. He would, I remember UB getting pissed, he would go on and on, but he did say a line about UB that was, I remember to this day. He said, the greatest clinician alive, dead, or yet unborn. And, the point he was making was, there's no one better than this, but he loved UB Goff. And I think we all did. He was there in the beginning, and I think he stayed loyal, right? Mike, he came back. He did a lot of lectures like yourself. So, he never forgot where he came from, UB. He was there in the beginning, loved the camp, and always came back and gave his heart and soul. I mean, he did 2-3 lectures a summer sometimes. And, he was coaching in the NBA. So, I put him on the Mount Rushmore. The other lecturer that was funny was Bobby Knight when I was a camper. Bobby Knight spoke in 1970. He was in Army. And he's speaking to the camp, and I'm sitting next to Mel Montgomery. Sonny, I don't know if you remember Mel Montgomery, but he was a great player from Buffalo. He played at Canisius, and he dominated the camp. He was there, he went to Canisius, great talent. He was there in 1970, and I got to know him. I was in the same bunk with him, and we were sitting next to each other. In Rosemont, the court was up on a hill, so Knight was speaking, and he points at Mel Montgomery next to me, sitting at the lecture, and says, run down the hill and get a blade of grass. And, Montgomery got up and he was half asleep. Lectures were not his thing. He wanted to go and get the ball. He wasn't worried about a lecture. So he gets up and he kind of jogs, really walks and gets the blade of grass. And he brings it to Knight. And Knight you could tell Knight was pissed, gives him a dirty look. And intimidating look, and you could see Mel got nervous. So he said, could you go a little faster and run down? This is not a good blade of grass. Go get me another one. So Montgomery sprinted as hard as he could and just ran right into the woods. Never came back. And we couldn't find him for 6 hours. He literally got so intimidated by Knight. He literally hid in the woods, and then 6 hours later, Goff, we were looking for him in a bunk.
Amber Alert.
Covers. I mean, that was one of the funniest. It wasn't fun. I mean, it was one of the funniest things I ever saw at a 5-star.
Jeez. How active was Goff, during the camp? I mean, was he the guy like Coach Mitch riding around on the golf cart and watching everybody, or how active was he? And I know you had told the story about his half-court shots, right, that he used to take.
That was a big tradition at the camp. That started in the beginning. Two guys from Queens that worked the camp, the Diamond Brothers. I don't know if Pete or Mike remember them.
Remember them? Yep. Joe.
They were comedians. They had the shtick, and they would imitate Goff, and then they got the camp to yell at him to shoot, and it would piss him off because one thing with Goff is he wanted everything on time. He really got pissed if the lecture was 5 minutes late, and he would miss sometimes 15, 20 shots in a row. And he would finally, like, he'd turn around and go, shut the F, he'd get really mad at the camp. But that was a tradition. Every summer, he would take a two-handed set shot before a lecture. But
Mitch, remember, every time he time he missed, you had 350 campers go, shit, because Goff, when he missed it, he go, shit. So you had 350 kids, shit, missed air ball, shit, So about 10 shots, he throws it away, brick, shit. And then he starts shaking his hands like this, like you're getting loose. It was all-time New York piece of work character, But as Mitch said, it was a tradition. Go ahead, Mitch, sorry to interject.
But he was very Chuck and Sonny involved with the camp. He woke the camp up every morning with music. There was a shed in Honesdale. He would go in the shed, and on the loudspeaker, he would play Judy Garland, Frank Sinatra, Benny Goodman. Like he loved Judy, so he played music to wake the camp up. And he had a bugle at one time. Would blow a bugle, and he'd yell out after he blew the. All right, everybody up. That was his, that was his phrase. So he was very involved. He got the kids up. He timed the stations. He was there with a whistle. I don't know if you have Pete and Mike remember. He would blow the whistle right on 20 minutes. He would walk around, watch the stations. He watched the. He was like an eagle. He watched everything. He was a hawk. He watched everything that went on. He was very upset sometimes when the lecture didn't show on time. He'd go crazy. He wanted. But that's what made the camp great, I think. I think his overseeing of it, his getting the same people every year to work. He was very meticulous with the stations. He kind of gave you what he wanted taught. He'd give you a topic. And that's what I think made the camp really good.
A lot of guys who we've talked to, fellas, and whether they were, top flight players or middle of the road players, always speak about Goff with affection. I mean, I think that was one of his biggest attributes is everybody liked the guy and you wanted to be at the camp. Not only was it the best camp to be at, as far as competition goes to show you wares to the college coaches and stuff, but I think, they had a friendship with him and they really, really liked this guy for some reason. So talk about each of you, if you would, talk about him and his personality and what kind of guy he was and how he developed those relationships with all these fantastic players that played there.
Mike, you want to go?
Mike?
Well, I think you have to agree that Goff had favorites, okay? Guys that he knew went out of their way to spend more time with him because whether it was proximity, whether it would be picking him up to take him to games, whether it would be staying with him at the Carnegie Deli after a big game at night. They'd stay, an hour or 2 hour and a half afterwards to have a big sandwich with him and talk over things. Guys who would be religiously calling him, whether it be 5 times a week, 4 times a week, every other day. They stayed in touch and they would keep him informed of, might have seen a good player that they recommended to him, or they knew they were calling to allow him to bounce things off of them. And I'm going to have to be excused for 1 second. And as a result of that, some of them became his favorites, the guys that he knew he could turn to, that he could count on, that he could rely on. And with me, I always had a relationship with Goff where he knew if he called me and needed something, I would do everything I possibly could to get it done for him. But I wasn't a guy that called him every day religiously. I'd call and touch base with him every so often to let him know I'm there, ask him how he was doing, throw something out that I had seen basketball-wise that may help out. But I also had gotten out of that metropolitan area, moved on, whether it was University of Rhode Island, Madison College, Villanova University, and then eventually with Hubie, with the Atlanta Hawks. So because of where I was, it wasn't as easy for me to get to see him as often as other people. But I don't know if there's anything you ever would ask him that he wouldn't do for you if he could get it done. And I think he really appreciated knowing the rides you gave him, the information you may have passed along, getting something done for him that he needed done, or just watching out for his general well-being and telling him about it. I think he really, really down deep appreciated it and knew that you were trying to do the best for him.
Yeah. Mitch, your thoughts?
Well, my relationship, I think like Mike, I coached at a lot of places, so it was hard for me to, stay as close to him in the years that I was really busy. I got very close to him, though, the last 3 years of his life. I had just been let go at Siena, so I had a lot of time, and I spent a lot of time with him on the phone. We put together, Mike came and spoke at one of the clinics. We put together 2 clinics for him in Albany that were very successful. He really appreciated Mike coming and Calipari and, all the coaches that came. It was a wonderful thing. We rallied around him. And this was in a time of his life where he was not, sometimes when you get older and he was out of the camp business, he was just doing the clinics. So people weren't calling him as much. He had his great friends, like I met Pete, Mike, myself, we always stayed in touch with him. But I felt good about really getting to know him those last 3 years. I mean, I knew him, like Mike said, I'd call him occasionally when I was coaching, but you're busy. You don't have a chance to see him. But the last 3 years, I really spent a tremendous time with him. I really got to know him. When I was let go at Siena, he was the first person to call me and look. He called 5 or 6 coaches to help me get back in. That's one thing he would do. If you were in his family and something happened, like you lost a job, like Mike said, he would help you. He would get on the phone. He wouldn't just say it. He would get on the phone and help you. So my relationship with him was really like family. I mean, we were, very close. I really loved him. I thought he was a good person. He spent time with my wife on the phone. My wife, Susan, got to know him. They had a good relationship. So I was fortunate that I had the time to spend with him. I think when I look back and we did all the research, Pete and Mike, to get him in the Hall of Fame, the committee, you don't realize how many people he impacted that really felt a strong connection to him. People that came out of the woods. I mean, this committee we had of 12 people, to help with the strategy to get him in. They worked really hard. They had a strong connection to him. I'm not going to go through all the names, but, there are a lot of people that, wanted to give back to him, for what he did for them. And I'm going to mention John Calipari. He was one of them. He did a lot, to help get him in the Hall of Fame. And there were others, but I know John, reached out, got him on the ballot. And when he got in the Hall, we were also really, we were all elated. We couldn't have got better news on Sunday.
Yeah. Now that you mentioned that, Mitch, last question from Sonny and I, and because we're running a little late on time, and Mike's got to get ready for a big game tomorrow. So, now Garth makes the Hall of Fame, well-deserved honor. I mean, he's had such an impact on the game that we all love here. And Pete, talk about the impact that he's had on the game of basketball through the camp, and all the things that he did for kids and for coaches alike, and gave them their starts and stuff like that. Talk about the impact that he's had on the game and what he means to the game of basketball.
He's done more for basketball, Chuck and Sonny, in my opinion, all right, in the last 75 years than anyone. High school and college, all right, wasn't the NBA, but he developed so many great players and coaches and, broadcasters and unbelievable, teaching the game. Coach Krzyzewski, the all-time leadingest coach, right? Golf used to wear a Duke watch. I get nervous because Duke helped send me to oblivion. I used to get blushes when I saw it, but he helped so many people. He used to help Coach K. I said, he don't need any help. Give me some guy. Coach K, he picks a guy. But so many people, he got in. He blew away the committee. I won't go into details, but when so many people, hit him, the committee about golf and what he did. And Grant Hill was unbelievable speaking. Grant Hill was going to go to North Carolina. He was going to go to all set to go. He comes to the camp. right? He loves the camp. He loved golf. Golf says, hey, go where you want to go, but take a look at Coach K. Do visit their official visit. He goes over, boom, 5 days later commits to Duke. You know what I mean? So he influences so many people. He didn't force them, though. He just said, hey, take a look. And he influenced so many people teaching the game. His influence is going to go on for hundreds of years. I mean, just people trickle down, watching the films of the guy, UB Brown speaking, and Mike doing a great job speaking, and just he touched so many lives. I mean, he changed my life. I was a high school coach. He says, hey, go to Hawaii. He says, where's Hawaii? I don't know where Hawaii was. I didn't know whether, I think over the George Washington Bridge, I thought it was Russia. I said, what's Hawaii? So I went there for a year, and assistant for 10 years, different schools, became a head coach at 3. So he changed my life for the better. He changed so many lives for the better. And he could read people, Chuck and Sonny. He could read, because he dealt with millions of people, kids on the camp, coming to camp, his high school coach, his AU, before the AU, but he dealt till he knew people that were BSing, and he knew people that had good hearts, that are loyal, that worked their tail off. He could read people, and he wanted to help everybody. He didn't want to just help the stars. He wanted to help guys, and it was a sense of pride for him to get a guy a Division II scholarship, at St. Michael's in Vermont. Kenny Johnson, one of my players, he helped him. Will help a guy go to Duke, help a guy go to Rutgers. So he just had a big heart. He wanted to help people. And as was mentioned before, Chuck, by Mitch, when he had a chance to get into the hall, that John Calipari helped to get him on the docket, so many people wanted to go to bat for him. You know what I mean? Because he did so much for people in his life. He had a sense of pride, helping everybody he could. And I love him for it. And he did a lot for me and for thousands of people.
Mike, your final thoughts on Garfinkel?
As Pete said, he certainly had a major, major impact on my life in basketball. And just by going there, the connection to Hubie Brown. And when I think of, people say, well, how did you first meet Hubie Brown? I met Hubie Brown because I went to Hackensack High School and played football, basketball, and baseball. And Hubie Brown was in our league at that time. It was called the NNJIL, Northern New Jersey Interscholastic League. And Hubie was an assistant in football, head basketball coach, and head baseball coach. And I played against him all 3 sports. And I can remember him coming up to me at the end of the baseball game in my senior year. And he had some wonderful words to say to me after competing against him. And then followed back up with a phone call asking me that summer, did I want to play in his summer league that they were running in Fairlawn? And then asked me if I wanted to be a lifeguard at the camp that he was running. And then, when he makes me part of the 5-star family by telling Garf about me, Garf giving me the opportunity, and then just carry it forth from there, everything that happened along the way. Garf giving me the exposure. He put us on a stage. And those speakers that would come in, there was pressure on the speakers because they knew that the day before Mike Krzyzewski had been there, or the day before Hubie Brown had been there, or George Raveling had been there, or Dick Vitale had been there. And now they wanted to show these campers that, hey, I can do as well as that guy did. But they were pretty high standards that you had to live up to. And I know when Garf asked me to speak to the camp, I would be nervous. I'd be like, you get that nervous thing in your stomach because you wanted to do well. You wanted to teach the kids. You wanted them to be listening to you. So sometimes in difficult situations with the heat and the gym and the whole thing. But that got your competitive instincts going. And all of this, the exposure that we received was because of this one man, Howard Garfinkel, who he watched you, he evaluated you, he gave you a chance. And then you had to produce, bottom line. I loved Howard Garfinkel, and he knew that.
Mitch, we got 2 minutes, pal. You take us home. What were your last thoughts about Garf?
Well, I think just to reiterate what Mike and Pete said, how he impacted, I think when you look at how he impacted the game and through, he was the initial person that did the recruiting service back in the 1960s through his camp. I think what Mike, and Pete both are basically saying is he provided access and opportunity to so many people, like I said, I don't get to Boston College if I don't go to the camp. He took an interest in me. I don't get to meet Mike Fratello and get to Villanova in '77. You know, he helped me along the way. I mean, he helped, but when we went to work on getting him in the Hall, when we put together this committee, it was amazing how many people felt the same way that Mike, Pete, and I felt. They really wanted to do whatever they could for Howard, you know, for Garth. They wanted to get him in the Hall. They really believed he deserved, and he did. He does. Everybody you speak to says it to him, you know, to a person. He deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. So when it happened Sunday, I mean, I was elated. You know, and obviously also the fact that Jay Wright went in at the same time is nice. And, you know, but Howard Garfinkel is a giant in the game. He contributed so much. And I think it was nice that the Hall of Fame recognized that. You know, they recognized what his reach was, how many people he reached and impacted. And, you know, there's you could have another podcast and you could have 3 other people say the same thing about him.
Yeah.
You know, that's what he was. He was a tremendous contributor and a huge person in the game.
What a great way to end this edition of the Big East Rewind, guys. I can't thank you enough for coming on. I know you guys are all busy. Mike, you went through hoops for us to be here. I appreciate that. Have a great game tomorrow with Marv. Enjoy every minute of that. Last time being on the microphone with the great Marv Albert. That's going to be awesome. I can't wait to watch the game. Mitch, thank you for being here. And Coach Gillen, thanks a lot for being here. We really appreciate it.
Yep. Thanks for inviting me. And Mike, have a great game tomorrow. Looking forward to watching it, Mike. Congratulations.
Thank you guys, appreciate it very much. I'm excited.
Great game.
A lot of fun. Guys, you've been watching the Big East Rewind with Sonny, Spera, and Chuck Everson. This Big East Rewind is produced and directed by Nick Chico Corvus and Daryl Gurney. You can catch us on YouTube, Spotify, and wherever else you get your podcasts from. And if you want to contact us, you can reach us at bigeastrewind@gmail.com. Thanks again for joining us. Have a great day.